Lawyers, what was the weirdest case you worked on? I had a case where a dealer client referred another dealer my way for representation on his charges. Now, this was all quite some time ago and is largely contained in police reports and courtroom testimony, so there's nothing privileged here. He came to my office, we sat down and exchanged pleasantries, and he started to spin out his yarn. He began by saying, "I don't know if you know this, but you're kind of a big deal," I said, with a bit of a wink and a nod. "Exactly," he said. "Seriously," I went a bit numb. He went on to tell me that he and his wife were preparing to go on a vacation down to Vegas, but before heading to the airport, they decided that they needed to wash their dog. Apparently, the dog escaped from the shower and hurt my client's arm. Seeing that they were going to be late to the airport, they threw everything they needed into a suitcase, did a line, and headed off. At the airport, the TSA noticed my client acting suspiciously in the security line as he was wounded. They took him aside and searched his luggage. Inside, they found $10,000 to $20,000 of loose cash and a pile of stained clothes, as well as an apothecary bag full of meds and everything else you would need for a trip to Vegas. In the little security detention area, my client decided that he was feeling a little hot and undressed a bit. For some reason, this also necessitated him standing on the bench where he should have been sitting. This is how the real police found him during the handoff from TSA. So we were back in my office now. This guy was buttoned up, white collar, long black, high quality trench, sober disposition, besides the incredibly obvious substance-induced narcissism. "I want to take this to the mat," he exclaimed, fueled by righteous indignation. You see, the problem with true unmedicated substance-fueled narcissism is that it is impossible for the narcissist to be wrong. It is incredibly difficult to represent someone like this. Eventually, I got him a sweetheart of a plea deal that I had to push him into taking. Quantities were for personal use, etc., do some treatment, everything goes away. There is one standout moment from a conversation he decided to have with the judge during one court appearance. "Are you employed, sir?" asked the judge, to which my client replied, "Yes, I'm an off-paper partner in a restaurant." Whatever that means. Sure, it doesn't sound like you're doing anything illegal there. The judge just rolled his eyes and let it go, one more rich junkie. About a year later, the guy got picked up again. Not quite as dramatic this time. Motor vehicle stop for poor driving, found tons of substances and loose bullets in the car, just sort of rolling around on the floor. The client ended up firing me when I recommended that he get some actual treatment. End of story. I'm not sure how it all turned out for him. Man, when somebody self-proclaims as a quote-unquote big deal, we already kind of know we're in for a bit of a show, right? A lot of drama, a lot of bravado, a lot of fluff, and I'm willing to bet a lot of jail time for that guy, but he's rich, so, Story 2. A couple of weirdos spring to mind. I was a young lawyer prosecuting in Texas. In Texas, a person is entitled to a jury trial for every criminal offense. Everything from a seatbelt ticket to serious offenses. I was prosecuting misdemeanors, and generally, we would try to get through most of the docket in the morning and try a case in the afternoon. We're not talking about complex cases here, mostly traffic offenses and city ordinance violations. Jury selection generally started at about 1, and most trials were done by 5. So I'm in court one day, and the one particular pro se defendant bubbles up to the top of the trial list. I forget what he allegedly did, but he insisted on a trial where his main defense was that he was a sovereign citizen. And as such, he was not subject to the jurisdiction of that court, or in fact, any court. When we started jury selection, the only people in the room were court personnel, the defendant, and the prospective jurors. Just like pretty much every other trial I ever conducted there, they were boring and you didn't stick around to watch if you could find something else to do. So we pick our jury and I put on the state's case. The defendant tries to muddle through and the jury finally gets the case around 4 p.m. or so. And I turn around for the first time in hours and realize that there are probably 20 or so HPD officers just sitting in the audience. I walk out in the audience to a cop I knew and asked him why they were all sitting in on a boring, routine trial. He said the defendant had sent intimidating letters to the judge, had attempted to sue her in his own court, and had attempted to place a lion on her house. They were there to make sure he didn't try any funny business. The jury came back with a guilty verdict and ordered him to pay a fine. Okay, great, normal everyday trial. Well, this guy, who had argued for a couple of hours that he was not part of any sort of government, and that he was free from all of that, turned to the clerk and asked if they would accept a credit card payment. The other one that comes to mind is a deposition from when I was still a law student. The firm I was working for represented a bus company that took senior citizens to casinos in the area. One lady, who looked just like Aunt B from Mayberry, fell off the bus. She sued and was being deposed. One of the lawyers had a list of doctors that he was going through with her, and she was identifying what they treated her for. One for high BP, one for heart condition, one for her bad knee, and on and on and on and on. He finally gets to the last doctor and asks her what that one is treating her for. "Oh, him," she says. "He's trying to get me off of grass." Story 3. Every lawyer worth his or her salt has a pro se plaintiff story, and all of them are probably the lawyer's weirdest. Mine is no different. Pro se plaintiff sued an engineer who performed a home inspection following severe winds in Texas and wrote a report for the insurer that no wind damage occurred. She sued the engineer. Now, no lawyer would take the case because it was frivolous and lawyers get sanctioned for filing frivolous lawsuits, so she filed it herself. In that petition, she outlined a ceiling fan coming loose and hurting her cat, that she had a summer wardrobe that got soot on it from, I have no idea, the name of her dog. She also said that sometimes her dog would act up and she would roll up a newspaper and teach her dog a lesson, but rest assured she loved her dog. That she was a good Christian woman and sang in her church, her favorite color was pink, and 63 other pages of quote-unquote facts that, as you have guessed, have absolutely nothing to do with wind or engineering. Her case was dismissed because she did not attach the affidavit Texas requires when you sue an engineer. She did not let that go. Nope, she filed an appeal. She lost that appeal. She filed a petition to the Supreme Court, alleging that the Court of Appeals had no idea what they were doing, that they were super corrupt, and that they were in league with the trial court judge to deprive her of her rights. The Supreme Court denied her review. She then filed about 6 more insane things with the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals before they threatened to hold her in contempt if she filed anything else of a frivolous nature. Some $50,000 in legal fees, and a year later, there was a final end to it all. Legal fees would have only been $3,500 or so if we ended with the dismissal. This is why any lawyer worth his or her salt would much prefer to deal with another lawyer on the other side. The insane amount of unnecessary legal fees expended in dealing with pro se plaintiffs is egregious. Yes, they are easy cases to win, but they take a lot of effort that, frankly, I'd rather spend on my phone or something. Okay, so TIL, today I learned you can file a lawsuit yourself, no lawyer needed. I mean, for that. For everything else, yeah, don't be stupid with your time or your money. Have an actual case and then have yourself an actual lawyer too, am I right? Story 4. When I was a baby lawyer, one of our clients received a subpoena for business records from a pro per plaintiff, PPP, a plaintiff who's representing himself or herself in litigation. The litigation was in connection with a business dispute that was headed towards mediation. We were involved because the PPP formerly worked for our clients and decided to leave and take some business with him. After he left, he got into a business dispute with one of the customers he took with him and decided to subpoena business records from his old employer, my client, to help with his case and countersuit. The PPP would send a demand letter a week and come to my office a few times to meet. He was pretty aggressive and threatening in all of our interactions, but most pro se or pro per litigants are, so I wasn't overly concerned. Given that our interests were aligned, I worked closely with the attorney representing the customer, who was directly involved in the litigation. He was an older, well-respected attorney in town. Fast forward a couple of months, and I get a call from a friend at the older attorney's firm. Unsurprisingly, the PPP lost at the mediation on both his claims and the counterclaims made by the customer. Apparently, after the mediation was over, he went out to his car and targeted both the older attorney and the CEO of the customer who was attending the mediation. He then went on the run from the police. I think the total amount at stake was around $20,000, really senseless. As soon as I learned about the incident, I alerted our building security to be on the lookout for the PPP. He was found the next morning wounded in a parking lot. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the police department who said my address and the address of the CEO of my client were in the PPP's car. I'm not sure why I needed to know that information, but whatever. Shortly after that, I decided to switch transactional work. Story 5. The day I learned that not everything on Jerry Springer is fake. I was a prosecutor for a couple of years. I was prosecuting a woman, a dancer, who hurt another woman, a bar girl, several times. She lived with a man who was a go between. He looked like the stereotype you see in the movies. The woman who got hit was one of his quote unquote talents. He was having relations with both at the same time, thus, there was some friction. Well, they got invited to be on Jerry Springer and they all agree to go. Huge fights happen. Dancer tells bar girl on the Jerry Springer show that if bar girl ever comes around the house again, dancer will hurt bar girl. And, well, you guessed it, bar girl comes by the house when they get back. A huge fight ensued and dancer got convicted. Note, I did not do the charging in the office, so another attorney charged the defendant with it rather than a more serious offense. Court reporters are probably the calmest people you will meet in a courtroom. They rarely show emotions. The court reporter taking the plea was very attractive. During the entire plea hearing, the go-between was staring at the court reporter the entire time. It was so bad, I was getting creeped out. The court reporter bolted from the courtroom the moment the hearing was over because she was completely grossed out by the dude. After the incident, but before the plea hearing, they got invited back to appear on the Springer show. They went 2 more times. It was an absolute crap show. It only appeared on the Too Hot for TV videos. Somewhere around here, I think I have the old VHS copy of the 3 appearances. Story 6. I started my career in juvenile court and handled a lot of mistreatment cases. Some were out of my control, but one in particular, mom and stepdad used and sold substances. There was mistreatment and all of it was verified by findings from child services and a guardian ad litem. Not to mention the mountain of evidence and witnesses. Mom goes to the bishop of her Mormon church, and next thing I know, child services is pushing unsupervised parent time even though I have a court order forbidding it. The kid's teacher was sneaking her in to see him at school because she was a member of mom's ward. Social workers are leaving him alone with her during supervised parent time because she's surely a good mom. She suddenly got this very high-priced lawyer who, at one point in court, calls me out on not being Mormon. The kid's development rapidly backslides. After that, it's just devolved into this surreal and insane fight like I was the villain personally. Her husband threatened my witnesses and they started dropping out and I couldn't get anyone to support them. Her husband blocked me in the court parking lot one day and looked me in the eye menacingly. When I finally left, he tried following me, but I live far away. At one point in a hearing on the protective order, the attorney for child services gets riled up and screams as loud as she can, "This family is being reunited, whether the Utah Raptor likes it or not." I didn't like it, and they won't be, but sweet tap dance and Moses, it should not have been that hard or horrible. Well, talk about a roller coaster ride through the legal system, The audacity of some people to try and twist the law to fit their narrative? I don't know about that. Since we're already halfway, though, I might as well remind you to hit those like and subscribe buttons for more real-life drama. Story 7. For a long time, I also used to do some relationship property work, who gets what stuff after a couple splits up. In one case, I represented the woman. Her ex-partner was self-represented and he was totally crazy. He used to write long letters to my firm addressed to the managing partner, who was a commercial lawyer, not a litigator, so he had nothing to do with the case. The letters always explained at some length that he was physically perfect, over 6 feet tall, and a genius with an IQ of 150, and that he would, quote, unleash the dogs of war and defeat us all if we opposed him. Speaking of dogs, one of the main aspects of his case is that he said that after he and my client split up, he bought a dog, and then the dog passed because he was so sad after the breakup that he caused the car to crash. So now my client owed him money for the 3 years' worth of dog food he'd supposedly bought. He used to ring me up and scream at me over the phone. He'd get weird and throw objects at his neighbors' property. My client was terrified of him, and even I used to peer out of the elevator before leaving work at night, in case he was waiting for me. The file was closed after he got tipsy and passed away at a party. And we're back to the lessons of story number 1. Another self-proclaimed quote-unquote big deal at 6 feet tall and an IQ of 150? Who buys 3 years' worth of dog food? Story 8. I'm not a lawyer, but I was a legal assistant. This woman tried to sue her former employer, who was a live-in nanny, as a tenant because she was terminated for being old. It turns out she often disappeared for 2 weeks at a time, leaving the family without childcare, only to come back weeks later to claim she was a tenant because she technically lived there for 3 months. The families didn't want to deal with the lawsuits, and other than the weird stuff, she was a damn good nanny, but after the second time, she was often fired. She would then file an age discrimination lawsuit. She went on to do this to several families under different names. We looked her up via a friend the firm had on retainer who was also a private investigator. She was a textbook vexatious litigant and always appeared pro per, then never appeared again after the first hearings, often an ex parte hearing. All of this is wild because filing a lawsuit where I was at the time was like $400. The prevailing question after our research on her was why these parents did not run background checks on people caring for their most precious babies. Maybe because she was an old grandma type, but I'll never know. Phew, I heard a lot of crazy stuff about working in employment law. Story 9. I'm not a lawyer, but I did paralegal work for about a year. There was a lady we represented who was flying down the highway, probably about 90 in a 55. The cop drives up behind her and the dash cam shows her swerving all over the place. He lights her up, she pulls over, and he walks up and says, "Hello, ma'am, how you doing? Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" She is obviously clueless. He says, "Well, it looks like your tabs, registration sticker, are expired. Have you been drinking tonight?" The rest of the stop goes par for the course. This lady is about 5'1" and maybe 100 pounds when she's soaking wet with change in her pockets. She blows a .29, almost 4 times the legal limit. Well, unfortunately, expired tabs were a secondary offense, meaning they couldn't pull you over just for that. They could give you a ticket for that after pulling you over for things like speeding, failure to mention a lane, failure to signal, etc. We motioned to have the case dismissed and it's thrown out. Had the cop said anything like, "You were going pretty fast," or "You were swerving," or anything, but because he stated the purpose as an illegal stop, the case was thrown out completely. Story 10. So many. Taxi driver who leased a car scraped the side against a concrete barrier rather than report it per policy. The driver washed it and turned it back in. It turns out it was the second time the driver had done that. They decided not to lease that driver anymore. The driver secretly recorded that conversation. The driver then filed 2 lawsuits. And when I got the case, the driver told me that I was going to be shocked to hear how poorly the driver was treated. I listened to a totally normal person say they were sorry they couldn't lease any more cars because it happened twice. No yelling or anything. Yeah, I got the cases dismissed. Also, suing a neighbor because the HOA made them fix violations in their backyard. There are lots of cases where we get medical records from people who are substance seeking or have pre-existing conditions that they want someone else to pay for, claiming huge injuries from tiny accidents, people doing dumb things on off-road vehicles and suing their friends and ruining relationships, all because it was, quote-unquote, wasn't personal. I thought your insurance would pay me. Same thing with playing sports with friends. If it has a ball in it, you might get hit. Story 11. I help victims of natural disasters access federal recovery grants to rebuild, repair, or flood-proof their homes. There's a law that protects tenants who are displaced by their landlord's voluntary participation in a federal program. Essentially, the landlord is responsible for paying reasonable costs associated with moving, as well as any amount they pay in rent above the cost of rent at the landlord's place. The program I work with the most told my client that they'd have to vacate their house for a few months so they could do the construction. Clients moved out as requested, but for whatever reason, the program didn't start construction for 5 months, so the house was just sitting vacant. During that 5 months, some squatters had moved in. They'd been there for 3 months when the program found them, so under our city's laws, they're tenants with all the legal rights as if they had a lease, which made my client responsible for their moving costs and anything they paid in rent above the $0 per month the squatters were then paying. I got the city to cover most of the costs through a stupid loophole about housing unit density. Story 12. I'm not a lawyer, but my mom is, and I worked for her for a summer digitizing her files. One case I read about sticks out of my mind. So my mom is primarily a divorce lawyer, but she does handle some criminal cases. The case in question is a family law case. As part of the process to digitize her files, I need to read through them so I can properly title and organize them. So this case is about a couple, wife and wife, who are getting divorced. They adopted 2 kids together. This in itself is not weird, but both the kids they adopted are special needs kids. I don't remember what exactly was wrong with them, but it's safe to say that they will likely never live entirely independently and would need to stay home or be in group homes. Maybe work an easy job like fast food or whatever. So this case was a custody case, but it wasn't that both moms wanted primary custody. It was more that neither of the moms wanted primary custody at all. I didn't read the entirety of the file, but I think the resolution ended up being 50-50 split custody. Okay, so I'm honestly in shock about this one. I didn't expect that to be an illegal battle to not have the kids. Has anyone seen that storyline to a Hollywood movie yet? Story 13. Okay, I'll give you two. First, someone is fired from her job because of failure to comply with tasks and is denied unemployment. Our defense is that she was pregnant. My client told me some other crazy stuff that was going on at the workplace. Discovery confirmed what my client told me, that her workplace was a front for a prepper compound and that they were demanding she do military-style drills while pregnant. Unemployment is still denied. Thanks, NC. Second, of my current caseload, I have a pending trial that includes a weapon. The weapon in question is a 20-inch box fan. Allegedly, the box fan was swung around via the electric cable like a flail before someone was hurt. My first reaction was pretty simple. Where can I buy a box fan with a cable that strong? Alright, so this field really is one of the most fascinating with weird, crazy, and downright unexpected cases we've never imagined. Not that I have, anyway. If you need a bit of a laugh after these because I could use a giggle or two, hop over to the next video. Lawyers, what's the dumbest thing you've seen happen in court? I can't believe story 1 is a real story. I'll see you there, and thanks for watching this one.